And now I'd like to introduce Margaret Kolk. Margaret is the Director of Training Services for SCS Global Services in Emeryville, California, and is a dedicated food safety professional with diverse experience in training, auditing, and consulting across the food supply chain. Margaret has developed and implemented HACCP-based food safety programs for a variety of food processing and retail facilities, preparing for FDA and USDA regulatory compliance. Margaret is an enthusiastic, experienced trainer with a BS in food science and certifications in food safety, instructional design, and technical writing. She has designed, developed, and delivered accredited courses in HACCP, Advanced HACCP, GMPs, internal auditing, advanced SQF practitioner, and other related topics. Margaret is an approved training provider for GFSI standards, including SQF, and is an approved trainer for FDA seafood HACCP, produce safety, and the FSMA Preventive Controls for Human Food courses. Margaret is a longtime supporter of SQF, having been an active member as well as the chair of the SQF International Conference Planning Committee for several years. We're glad Margaret could be with us today. Margaret, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I am very happy to be here today, and I would like to be sure everyone can hear me. So if I can get some feedback into chat on the quality of the sound and the fact that you can actually hear me, I would certainly appreciate it. Okay, good. Thank you, Teresa. Loud and clear. Okay, well, welcome to this webinar. I'm very pleased to be able to offer this webinar on FSMA training, what is required. I hope you're all enjoying your day so far. As Sarah mentioned, I am in Emeryville, California, overlooking the San Francisco Bay on a beautiful sunny day. Looking forward to the July 4th weekend, as I'm sure many of you are. I would like to shout out to people that have attended my Implementing SQF or my Advanced SQF Practitioner classes who have been actually emailing me and texting me, telling me they're going to be on this webinar. So good to hear from you, Scott and Maria and Jose and Mark. I hope I can offer information and clear up any misconceptions or any confusion that you may have about what is required for FSMA training. And we're actually going to go over, as Sarah mentioned, I have a quite lengthy background in training through FDA as well as GFSI. I did my first, I believe my first seafood HACCP trainer several years ago. I won't mention how many. So I've been involved with food safety training alliances for actually many years. So, okay. Okay, good. So what I'd like to do now is just sort of give you a U.S. regulatory perspective on food safety training. So what I'd like to do is take a look back from a historical perspective, where we began with food safety in the U.S. and actually where we're going. So in a nutshell, overall, during the past 100 years, food safety developments have become increasingly science-based, risk-based, transparent, and quantitative, as most of you know. I just want to tell you how many people I just looked up at the screen and saw we have 339 people on the webinar so far. That's great. I'm really glad to be able to reach all of you. So this trend in science-based, risk-based, transparent, and quantitative training and food safety programs is likely to continue and move forward over the next 100 years. So looking back and looking forward. So here's the food safety timeline, again, where we've been and how far we've come in the last 110 years. So we've got 1906, the Pure Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the fact that this was precipitated by President Roosevelt reading the book The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Then we had the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in 1938, And then, as everybody is well aware, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, the space program took off, and the powers that be realized that they needed to be able to prevent illness from pathogenic bacteria from causing illness for the astronauts in space. In 1969, the GMPs became law, good manufacturing practices, and they were revised in 1986. And there's a zero missing there. I apologize for that. It's 21 CFR 110, not 21 CFR 11. 1979, 21 CFR 113 became law. And then in 1995, the FDA seafood HACCP regulations became law. And I'm not sure if I have anybody from the seafood industry on there. As you well know, you are not required to comply with preventive controls rule because you're already regulated under seafood HACCP. And then a USDA regulation, FSIS pathogen reduction in 1996, again grandfathered in 9 CFR 304. Then JUICE HACCP regulations, and then after 2011, September 11, 2011, the Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002 became law. And then, as we're all familiar with the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act, and then fast forward or slow forward 7 years, and we have the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011. Again, that Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011 represents one of the most sweeping reforms to our food safety laws in more than 70 years. So we look back to 1938. Even though we have a lot of regulations, this is an overarching regulation which aims to ensure the safety of the U.S. food supply and protect public health by requiring not only domestic food processors and manufacturers, but also foreign processors, those exporting products into the United States, to proactively manage food safety and food defense hazards associated with the manufacture and transport of FDA, again, this is an FDA regulation, regulated food products. There are 41 sections. Has anybody read all 41 sections? I'm raising my hand. I can't say I remember every one of the 41 sections, but I have made every attempt to read those 41 sections. FSMA also, as you all know, grants the FDA the power to recall contaminated food. It increases inspections, and we're going to be involving not only the federal government, but your state and local governments will be involved in those inspection programs. And, of course, it demands accountability from you, the food processor, food manufacturer, to make sure that you are producing safe food. Also, the FSMA is also overseeing certain aspects of farming and the packaging of fresh produce. Okay, so let's look at some of these food safety requirements associated with the regulations we just discussed. So under 21 CFR 110, which of course, as we know, becomes 21 CFR 117 and has been significantly expanded, but that's a webinar for another day. So education and training under 21 CFR 110, the personnel who are responsible for identifying sanitation failures or food contamination should is the key word there, have a background of education or experience or a combination thereof to provide a level of competency which is necessary for the production of clean and safe food. So food handlers and their supervisors, again, should receive appropriate training in proper food handling techniques and food protection principles, and should be informed of the danger of poor personal hygiene and insanitary practices. And then, of course, under supervision, the responsibility for assuring compliance by all personnel with all requirements shall be clearly assigned to competent supervisory personnel. So that's what we have existing, 21 CFR 110. Those are the existing requirements. Now, under seafood HACCP, a minimum, so the following functions, so the functions being performed by an individual who has successfully completed training in the application of HACCP principles. So for fish and fishery products, so it's very specific to fish and fishery product processing, at least equivalent to that received under the standardized curriculum recognized as adequate by FDA or another qualified individual, or qualified through job experience. So it's very similar to what we have under the preventive controls rule. So again, job experience qualifies an individual to perform the functions if it has provided knowledge at least the equivalent to that provided through the standardized curriculum. So this is really the first time, 1995, that we actually hear the standardized curriculum, okay? So, and we also hear the term a trained individual. So a trained individual under seafood HACCP is one who has successfully completed training in the application of HACCP principles to fishery and fishery product processing, at least equivalent to that received under the standardized curriculum. Now, the standardized curriculum for seafood HACCP was developed by the Seafood HACCP Alliance, and I'm going to talk about alliances moving forward. Okay, so now we look at the requirements under the hazard analysis critical control point systems for meat and poultry production. So again, the individual performing the function of developing, reassessing, and modifying HACCP shall, now this is a shall, or I have must there, but it actually says shall, have successfully completed a course of instruction in the application of the 7 HACCP principles to meat and poultry production processing, including a segment on the development of a HACCP plan for a specific product and record review. So again, there are requirements. They must meet the training requirements, but they shall have successfully completed a course of instruction. Now, there was no alliance, or there was the International HACCP Alliance, which we're all familiar with. The International HACCP Alliance approves HACCP classes. They're out of Texas A&M. They actually started out as the International Meat and Poultry HACCP Alliance, and they've shortened it to the International HACCP Alliance, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. The courses that we teach at SCS are approved through the International HACCP Alliance, again, located at the Texas A&M University. And then we have the JUICE HACCP Alliance. So JUICE processors may meet the requirement for 21 CFR 120.13, which is the training requirement, by having employees or consultants undergo training using, again, the standardized curriculum designated in the JUICE HACCP guidance. However, under this particular regulation, processors are not required to have employees or consultants trained using the standardized curriculum. So other curricula may be used for JUICE HACCP that is at least equivalent to the standardized curriculum. So FDA authorization to use an alternative curriculum is not required under the JUICE HACCP regulation. However, if you're considering developing a JUICE HACCP course, you should use the curriculum that has been developed by the JUICE HACCP Alliance, which, by the way, is an alliance that was formed under the voluntary participation through industry, government, and academic members interested in guiding the juice industry to a higher level of food safety. And the JUICE HACCP Alliance, coincidentally enough, was coordinated through the Illinois Institute of Technology with support of the FDA and administered through ABJA. Very similar to what the preventive controls for human and animal food training is also administered through IIT. Okay, so now moving on to the Food Safety Modernization Act. Of course, we know it was signed into law in January of 2011. These are mandatory regulations, and it focuses on prevention. And it significantly expands the existing GMPs. We went from probably, 10, 12 pages of GMPs to the last I counted, it was about 35 pages of GMPs. Significantly expanded under the Food Safety Modernization Act. Okay, next. Okay, so here's an overview of the 7 rules, which is what we're going to be focusing on, training as related to the 7 rules, the 7 significant rules of the 41 sections of the Food Safety Modernization Act. So we have the preventive controls rule, and these, along with the description and the dates, I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them. They're going to be up there on the monitor for a few minutes. So is training required under the preventive controls rule for human food and the preventive controls for animal food? Yes, it is. Both of those the compliance dates are for many, many organizations is September 17th, 2016. The rules were finalized in September of 2015, and once those rules were finalized, the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, while they had been developing the curriculum that would be recognized, the standardized curriculum that would be recognized by FDA, the finalization of the training materials were put into process, and I'm sure many of you out there are probably you are lead trainers for preventive controls for human food, and some of you may be lead trainers for preventive controls for animal food products as well. Produce safety, are there training requirements? Yes, there are training requirements. The compliance date for produce safety, the rule was finalized in November of 2015. Compliance date for meeting the requirements or for complying with the requirements of the food safety regulation is January 13th, 2018. And we're going to get into talking about what the specific training requirements are. The Foreign Supplier Verification Program, the compliance date is May of 2017. The rule was finalized in November of 2015. Training is recommended, and I'm going to get into talking a lot more about the Foreign Supplier Verification Training Program, or Foreign Supplier Verification Program training materials. These training materials are currently being developed by the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, and I actually had a hot-off-the-press update this morning from FSPCA on the training for the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. I'll share with you in a few minutes. Okay. Third-party certification, the training requirement is for the auditors or the audit agents that are going to be doing the audits under the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. The compliance date is November of 2017. This rule was finalized in November of 2015. Next, we have the Sanitary Transport Rule. I have to state, though, that there are caveats to these trainings that I'm saying there is training required, but sometimes the training, like under Sanitary Transport Rule, may be somewhat limited to certain individuals involved in these rules. But there is training required also under Sanitary Transport. And then finally, intentional adulteration, or as we affectionately know it as food defense, which was the last regulation that was approved on May 31st of 2016. The compliance date for the food defense regulation is July 31st, 2017, and actually FDA has done a very good job of providing online training for food defense, and they are in the process of revising that training to meet the requirements of the rule. Okay, I'm going to talk for a few minutes now about what food safety alliances are. So I've mentioned the International HACCP Alliance, I've mentioned the Seafood HACCP Alliance, I've mentioned the Juice HACCP Alliance, and of course, hopefully you're all familiar with the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, and some of you may be familiar with the Produce Safety Alliance. Actually, in addition, some of you also may be familiar with the Acidified Foods Alliance. I don't have a slide on the Acidified Foods Alliance, but the Acidified Foods Alliance received a grant from USDA, and it's administered through the University of Wisconsin-Madison and NC State. and they're charged with training and developing training materials and curriculum specific to acidified foods. So as you can see up here on the slide, the Food Safety Alliance are representatives of industry, academia, and regulatory bodies. So at one point in time, in my previous employer, I was a member of the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance at its inception. So it was under the first FDA grant. It was a very enlightening experience. I didn't stay on the Preventive Controls Alliance, but they've done a really wonderful job of developing the curriculum, the recognized, standardized curriculum for the preventive controls for human food and the preventive controls for animal food. So that's just a little bit of background on what these alliances are, but they're representative of the entire food industry, and they get together to establish curriculum to help you, and specifically they target small to medium-sized food companies that may not have the resources to hire maybe a company like mine or a company like one of the other big certification bodies that also are training centers. So their focus is to help the smaller processors. And they also work not only, so we mentioned academia, but they work with the extension services as well to offer these trainings. Okay, so the Juice HACCP Alliance and the Seafood HACCP Alliance. So the Seafood HACCP Alliance was actually formed to more or less foster a uniform and current national education, training, and technical assistance. That's something I neglected to mention on the last slide. The alliances also established technical assistance programs, or as the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance calls theirs, the Technical Assistance Network, specific to the alliance, so the Preventive Controls Alliance, whereas the Seafood HACCP Alliance, their technical assistance program is very specific to the seafood industry. So their approach was to develop basic education materials, conduct a series of train-the-trainer courses, just like Preventive Controls, to help prepare instructors across the nation. As Sarah mentioned, I am a trained trainer for the Seafood HACCP Alliance. I've been through the upgrades of the trainings. The first training I went to, I believe, was back in the 90s. And they've done upgrades, trainings, revision trainings, upgrades trainings in the, I think in 2010. So the project is funded through the National Sea Grant College Program, and so they do provide trainings all over the country. And they are also administered through the Association of Food and Drug Officials. I mentioned AVDO. I apologize for not telling you what AVDO is in case you didn't know. So I just want to also emphasize that the Seafood HACCP Alliance doesn't develop or direct policy, nor do any of the other alliances. They don't develop or direct policy. Their role is strictly for the development and delivery of educational programs. The Juice HACCP Alliance was again formed through a voluntary participation from industry, government, and academic members interested in guiding the juice industry to a higher level of food safety assurance provided by HACCP. And as I haven't pointed out yet, but you're probably well aware, that a lot of our food safety laws and regulations are stimulated by, either foodborne illness catastrophes or disasters that have happened, and they're in response to they aim to mitigate the problems associated with these foodborne illness outbreaks. So again, the Juice HACCP Alliance was coordinated through the National Center for Food Safety and Technology at the Illinois Institute of Food Technology, again, IIT, with the support of the Food and Drug Administration. Okay, I'm trying to advance the slide, and it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now on to the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. And, of course, we all live in acronym city, so the PCHF is the Preventive Controls for Human Food. The PCAF is Preventive Controls for Animal Food, and the FSVP is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, and I could have put IA subcommittee, but I didn't, so International Adulteration Subcommittee. So there is an intentional adulteration subcommittee under the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, and they are working on curriculum, food defense curriculum. They're working with the existing materials, food defense materials that FDA has been developing since 2005, and they will be revising those training materials. So just to tell you a little bit about the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, it was established in 2011 as part of a grant from FDA, again, to the Illinois Institute of Technology's Institute of Food Safety and Health, IFISH, as we affectionately know it. The purpose of the Alliance is to develop and maintain cost-effective education and training programs to assist our industry with understanding and achieving compliance with the preventive controls regulation requirements applicable to the food industry. So both the human food and animal food regulations are covered in separate courses. I don't know whether I think you can respond to any questions I have in the chat function. So let's check it out. Let's see if you can. Type into chat if you've already attended a Preventive Controls for Human Food FDA's standardized recognized curriculum. So if you have attended a Preventive Controls for Human Food trainer, type into chat, and I'll let you know if I'm seeing what you're typing into chat. Yes, I am seeing it. That's great. Okay. Not where I thought it would be, but let's see if I can find it. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Actually, I just realized I have all these chats in here. Okay. This actually, somebody lost audio. Somebody got it back. Okay, good. No, not attended. Yes, attended. Yes, attended. So it looks like we have a lot of people on here who, we have a trainer on here as well. Okay, looks like a lot of people have already attended the FSPCA Preventive Controls course. Some of you have not. As a lead trainer, I highly recommend it. It's really, although it's not required, and of course I'm going to jump ahead as I usually do, it's not required, but really it's a wonderful course. It's very intensive. I hope those of you who have attended agree with me, and I know that the lead trainers will agree with me. It's a very comprehensive course, very well presented, very interactive. Highly recommend it if you haven't already done it. Okay, so this is an overview. I just gave you an overview of the Preventive Controls Alliance. Let's see, ABDO, I do need to point out that ABDO and the IFPTI administer the certificates for all the participants. So those of us who are lead trainers know we have to get online and order our certificates. Once our students have completed the class, and you directly receive your certificate from IFPTI. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Produce Safety Alliance and the Sprouts Alliance. So the Produce Safety Alliance is a collaboration project between Cornell University, Betsy and Gretchen are doing a great job, the United States Department of Agriculture, and the Food and Drug Administration. So this is their overarching objective is to provide the produce industry and associated groups like the Sprouts, that should say Sprouts Safety Alliance. I actually went back and made some changes to my PowerPoint presentation after I sent it to Leslie, so you're not seeing the changes that I've made. So like the Sprouts Safety Alliance, so they want to provide them again. Their mission is education and training and support, so technical support. So they want to provide groups with training, education opportunities related to the best current practices. They also will be developing guidance. The Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance also is in the process of developing guidance with current as well as future regulatory requirements. So the Sprouts Alliance, again, is a public-private alliance, and its mission is to develop core curriculum, training, and outreach programs for stakeholders in the sprout production community. So you may ask yourself, why is there a difference between the Produce Safety and Alliance and the Sprout Safety Alliance? As many of you probably know, there have been some foodborne illness outbreaks associated with the growing of sprouts. They're grown differently than strawberries. They're grown differently than lettuce. So it's been decided that there be a Sprout Safety Alliance developed as well. So the training materials, as some of you may or may not know, if you're involved in produce safety, a trainer was actually held last year. I attended a trainer for produce safety back in June of 2015. The materials were developed before, the materials and curriculum were developed before the rule was finalized. So the Produce Safety Alliance at Cornell went back to the drawing board. The training materials should be ready in September of 2016, and they'll start the trainer courses for those of you who may be interested in becoming a trainer for the Produce Safety Alliance. If you're interested, go to the Produce Safety Alliance website through Cornell University and keep yourself up to date with those sorts of things. Okay, good. All right, so preventive controls training. So again, the standardized training curriculum was developed by the FSPCA and the Technical Information Network to help domestic and foreign food industry, including certain mixed-type facilities on farms, to help them comply with the requirements of the preventive controls for human and animal food, as well as the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So the result of this work was 2 separate standardized hazard analysis preventive controls training courses. They're working on distance education modules. So there's one for human food and one for the human food industry and regulatory personnel associated with the human food industry, and another for animal food industry and the regulatory personnel associated with the animal food industry. Okay. I'm sorry, I was just reading something in chat. So the training curriculum addresses resources for and the preliminary steps in developing a food safety plan. Those of you who are familiar with the rule know that preliminary steps are not a requirement under the rule. However, hazard analysis is. So the training materials do address and include developing preliminary steps, the 5 preliminary steps of your developing your HACCP team, describing your product, your distribution, your consumer, and developing a process flow diagram and verifying that. It includes also the types of hazards, conducting a hazard analysis, identifying preventive controls for those hazards, monitoring those preventive controls and/or CCPs, verification and validation, corrective actions and corrections, record keeping, and as well as those regulatory requirements. Okay, so what are the preventive controls training requirements? Okay, so if you recall the provisions that we talked about previously, so for seafood HACCP and for juice HACCP, they were not binding, okay? So some of the previous non-binding provisions, such as education and training, are now binding under the Preventive Controls for Human Food Rule. So all employees must be trained in food hygiene and food safety, including employee health and hygiene. So management is required to ensure that all employees who manufacture, process, pack, or hold food are qualified to perform their assigned duties. So these employees must have the necessary combination of education, training, and experience necessary to manufacture, pack, or hold clean and safe food. Individuals must receive training in principles of food hygiene and food safety, including the importance of employee health and hygiene. So training is essential to ensure that each person in your system understands their role and responsibility related to the requirements of this regulation and your company's procedures to ensure compliance. So different types of training, like GMP training, wait a second here. Okay, I'm going to wait just a second before I talk about the PCQI. So different types of training are needed for individuals in different roles and responsibilities. So managers, supervisors, quality control staff, and others with overarching responsibilities for developing and implementing effective procedures to meet GMP requirements should understand or be aware of all of the requirements and the appropriate strategies that you need to implement to meet those requirements. So they're going to more likely need more comprehensive training than maybe your production line workers or your warehouse employees, or workers assigned to do less complex and directed tasks. Okay, let's talk about the PCQI, the Preventive Controls Qualified Individual. So that person must successfully complete training in risk-based preventive controls at least equivalent to standardized curriculum. That standardized curriculum is the training that was developed by the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. So the training is not required. However, it's highly recommended. However, again, going back to the slide where I said training is required, training is required. The PCQI may complete training, so they must complete training, or they may be qualified through experience, but everyone must be trained in food safety and employee health and hygiene. So again, education and training are now binding under FSMA. So what's the role of the preventive control qualified individual? That individual is trained or, something didn't show up there, sorry. That qualified individual prepares or oversees the food safety plan, aka previously known as the HESA plan. So they oversee the food safety plan. It's the responsibility of the PCQI to validate the process preventive controls. It's the responsibility of the PCQI to review records. For instance, monitoring records must be reviewed within 7 days of the date of their creation. It's the PCQI's responsibility to determine corrective actions and how appropriate they might be. And then every 3 years, or when required, it is the responsibility of the PCQI to reanalyze the food safety plan. Okay, let's talk a little bit about produce safety now. So is there a requirement for training? Yes. Supervisor or other responsible party must successfully complete training at least equivalent to that received under the standardized curriculum as recognized adequately by the FDA. So the standardized curriculum under FDA is being developed by the Produce Safety Alliance. However, the Produce Safety Alliance is developing the training. However, it is not necessary for a farm to attend their specific training. However, you must attend a training that is at least the equivalent. And the recommendation by PCA is that you submit your training materials to the PSA, Produce Safety Alliance. You submit your training materials to the Produce Safety Alliance to ensure consistency with their curriculum. So if you have curriculum already developed, or if you're using someone else's, or maybe a GFSI curriculum that's already been developed and you want to modify that curriculum, it's the recommendation of the Produce Safety Alliance that you submit it to them, and they will determine whether or not it is equivalent to the FDI-recognized standardized curriculum. So farm workers who handle covered produce, and remember, not all produce is covered under the produce safety rule, who handle covered produce or food contact surfaces, and their supervisors must be trained on certain topics, including the importance of health and hygiene. So again, a combination of training, education, and experience to perform those duties. I'll look at the question popped up. FSP, the Food Safety Plan, needs to be reanalyzed every 3 years, not annually. That is correct, Linda. It needs to be reanalyzed. Of course, if there's a change in the product or the process or FDA comes up with a reason that you might need to reanalyze it other than every 3 years, but the rule requires that you reanalyze the Food Safety Plan every 3 years. Okay, so that's it for the produce safety, but yes, training is required under the produce safety rule. Now let's look at the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So under the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, a qualified individual, so we looked at the definition of the preventive control of qualified individual. The definition for the qualified individual is very similar to that of the preventive control of qualified individual. So a qualified individual must perform all required tasks and must be able to read and understand the language of any records reviewed in performing an activity. So at this point in time, the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance is working on developing training and technical assistance programs to facilitate compliance with the the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. The training is slated to be introduced in the fall. I just spoke with someone from the Preventive Controls Alliance this morning and was told that the training is slated for fall, and you can check on the FSPCA website. However, it's under reconstruction right now, so if you're on their listserv, they most likely will be in touch with you. But again, the training is slated for fall. It is subject to change, so it may not actually happen in the fall, but that's the prediction of the person I spoke to, who is pretty knowledgeable at the FSPCA. Okay, so accredited third-party certification. So the certification program should define the requirements to initially qualify audit agents, as we know them as auditors, and managers involved in the food safety audit. So this accredited third-party certification establishes a voluntary program for the accreditation of third-party certification bodies, again also known as auditors, to conduct food safety audits and issue certifications of foreign facilities and the foods for humans and animals they produce. These requirements obviously will help ensure the competence and independence of the accreditation bodies and the third-party certification bodies when they participate in this program. Also, we'll need to ensure that the auditors are competent and objective. So what are some of the auditor training requirements? Okay, so FDA has designated an entry-level auditor. They should have a university degree in food-related discipline, 30 hours of coursework, or equivalent level instruction, so these are all or. So university degree in food-related discipline, or 30 hours of coursework, or an equivalent level of instruction, or demonstration of sufficient knowledge and experience to complete their function required and the designated tasks. So that's the entry-level auditor. So to qualify as a lead auditor, The lead auditor must have a minimum of 5 years' experience in food or an associated industry, including 2 years of work in quality assurance or food safety functions in food production or manufacturing, retail, inspection, or enforcement, or the equivalent. So completion of other formal qualifications, such as an advanced degree, can substitute for a maximum of 3 years of working experience toward the required 5 years and experience. Okay, so the accredited auditor, so those auditors that are currently auditing SQF or other GFSI standards will qualify as lead auditors because these are the requirements under GFSI for auditors to conduct those certification audits. Okay, intentional adulteration. So FDA has funded an intentional adulteration subcommittee, as I mentioned earlier, under the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. And the agency intends to leverage the expertise of state and local public health officials, state and local public health associations, and industries associated to develop a standardized curriculum needed to meet the training requirements for the intentional adulteration rule. So as most of you know, if you have anything to do with food defense, you probably are already aware that FDA offers online training programs, which include a really great program called the Food Defense Plan Builder, which actually guides the user. If you've been on, type in the chat if you're familiar with the Food Defense Plan Builder. So for those of you who are not, I highly recommend, and I think my next slide does have the website listed. So the Food Defense Plan Builder guides you through company information, mitigation strategies, a vulnerability assessment, focus mitigation strategies, emergency contacts, action plan, and many supporting documents. So you can actually build your food defense program. I'm going to try and advance. Using, basically it's a Food Defense 101. So this, again, it's being, looks like there's a typo there. It's being updated, so they're revamping it right now, the online food defense courses. Again, they're meant to bolster the food industry's defense measures against an active intentional food contamination. So they have already been updated, but the most current courses are still in the process of being updated. So then the 4 courses I've listed here are the Food Defense Awareness for Professionals, also a really good program. Food Defense Awareness for frontline employees. The regulations established to help protect the food supply, and then Alert. Alert's one that's been around for quite a while, and I've actually used this program when I've worked on a consulting basis with some of my clients, the Alert program. Let me go back just a second. I didn't focus on the personnel assigned to vulnerable areas must receive appropriate training. So when you do your threat analysis, depending on what method you decide to use, it can be something similar to the HACCP method. So you're looking for threats as opposed to hazards. The threat of your product being contaminated, adulterated, or in any way compromised. When you do your threat analysis, you identify vulnerable areas in your facility, whether they be receiving or somewhere in processing or packaging. You identify those vulnerable areas. Those people who are responsible for those vulnerable areas must receive appropriate training. So the verbiage is rather loose, but there is a training requirement that people who are responsible for handling your food defense program or involved in your food defense program at least be trained in the areas that they're responsible for monitoring. Because the food defense program, again, is going to require that you monitor those areas, that you implement corrective actions when necessary, and then you verify that the implementation of the program is actually as it's supposed to be. Okay, intentional, I've already done that one. Let me move on to the next one. All right, sanitary transport. This is our final rule. So Training of carrier personnel in sanitary transportation practices and documentation of the training. So what's necessary here? Who's covered? Let's talk about the sanitary transport rule for just a second. Because this may not be clear to everybody. So the final rule applies to shippers. There's a ship right there, so that's a shipper. Receivers, loaders, and carriers who transport food in the U.S. by motor or rail vehicle, whether or not the food is offered for or enters interstate commerce. Okay? So who does this apply to? Shippers who ship food into the United States directly by motor or rail vehicle, say they're coming in from Mexico or Canada. Shippers who are shipping by ship, air, or arrange for the transfer of the intact container onto a motor or rail vehicle for transportation within the United States, if that food will be consumed or distributed in the United States. So what's not covered? Shippers, receivers, or carriers with transportation operations less than $500,000 in annual revenue, transportation activities performed by a farm, transshipments of food through the U.S. So that container drops off its load at the port in Oakland, a train picks up the container, puts it on the train, carries it up to Canada, or carries it down to Mexico. That's not covered. Food not consumed in the United States. So food just may be, again, that sort of relates back to the transshipments of food through the U.S. So if it's not being consumed here in the United States, it's not covered under the Sanitary Transport Rule. Also, what's not covered is transportation of food fully enclosed by a container, except if it requires temperature control, live food animals, except, there are exceptions, to mollusk and shellfish, compressed food gases and food contact surfaces. Again, these are not covered. Human food byproducts for use as animal food without further processing. So if you are a brewer and you're just shipping your waste to the local farm to be used to feed the pigs, and you're not doing any further processing, the transportation of that waste would not be covered. Okay, so some examples of the types of food subject to the final rule. Foods transported in bulk, say not animal feed. Packaged foods are not fully enclosed by a container. Foods that require temperature control for safety. So again, the training requirements are, oops, I guess that didn't get in there. Okay, sorry. The training requirements are specifically when the carrier and the shipper have agreed in a written contract that the carrier is responsible in whole or in part for the sanitary conditions during the transportation operations. Carrier personnel, so who's ever driving the truck to deliver the product, must be provided with adequate and documented training on sanitary transport practices, and they must be made aware of any potential food safety problems that may occur during food transportation. So, what problems may occur during food transportation? If you have a temperature-controlled truck transporting a food that requires temperature control and the truck breaks down, that's a potential food safety problem. If the truck is not loaded properly so as to prevent any cross-contamination, that can precipitate a potential food safety problem. So the carrier also, it's not mentioned specifically, but the loaders must also be trained in how to load a vehicle in a sanitary manner to prevent any potential food safety problems. And how FDA envisions this training to be delivered is They don't anticipate a one-day course on this. They don't even anticipate a half-day course on this. They anticipate, and because this rule was just finalized in May, a month ago, or a month ago tomorrow, they don't have the training materials at this point developed, but they envision something like a 1-hour online training for loaders and for carriers. So, and I'm not really even sure at this point who is going to be delivering that training. It may be funneled through the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. If anybody knows on the call, knows that for a fact, that would be great. But as of this point, again, the rule was finalized May 31st, but they envision a 1-hour online training for loaders and carriers. Okay, so I'm about to conclude now, so we have some time to answer questions. So all training for FSMA, all of the 7 rules, must be documented. That includes retraining, and they must be retained. The documentation requirement, the record retention requirement under the Preventive Controls Rule is 2 years. You must retain your records. So the FSMA training records must also be retained as specified in the specific regulation. Records must be kept may be kept in individual personnel files, and this is just an example. Many of you might have already seen this. I took this from the Preventive Controls training. The information that should be included on the training record the information on the training record should include what you see here on the slide. It should include the name of the course, the location, the date completed, the name of the trainee, and the date the trainee was trained. I also like to see verification that the training was actually attended. So there may be more information that you want to include in that. It's up to you, but this is the minimum requirement. Okay, time for questions. What is the difference and or similarities if a HACCP course is ANSI-accredited program or HACCP Alliance approved? Oh, I can answer that question. Okay, HACCP Alliance, the International HACCP Alliance, is an organization that was founded at Texas A&M back in the the mid to late 1990s, and it specifically was addressing HACCP training for the meat and poultry industry in order for them to comply with the mega reg for HACCP. And so they are not really accredited. However, many organizations will submit and have been submitting their course materials to the International HACCP Alliance for approval. I know I've done that several times myself. However, they're not accredited to any specific accreditation organization like ANSI. Okay, so an ANSI-accredited program, and I have firsthand knowledge on ANSI-accredited programs. I actually was responsible for developing an ANSI-accredited training program at my previous employer. So that program is developed under the guidance of an ANSI standard. So it really is all about the quality and the development, the quality and the development of the instructional materials. So the accredited program must meet the requirements of the particular ANSI standard. Hope that answers your question. Okay, I see a comment here. Food Defense. FDA just added 2 additional years. So new date for most is for Food Defense is 2019, not 2017. Thanks, Linda. Let's confirm that. Let's verify that. Okay, if you are a PCQI for human food, do you have to go through a PCQI for animal food when the company's animal feed is a byproduct of food manufacturing? No, you do not. You're okay with the PCQI for human food. Okay, I've already addressed the reanalysis every 3 years. Yes, it needs to be reanalyzed every 3 years. Does the PCQI have to review all records associated with the food safety plan, or can a trained individual assist in this, and the PCQI oversees the process? Yes, the PCQI oversees the process, but they have to sign off on the records. We have a seafood processing company. We are exempt from FSMA, but we also sell non-seafood items. They're purchased from a foreign supplier. I would like to know if there has to be a food safety plan for those. I'd have to know more. You say you purchase from a foreign supplier, you sell other items. Are you doing any processing? I need more information before we can answer that. Okay, here's one. A container that comes from Chile to a U.S. port and that is transported by truck to its final destination in the U.S. would be covered under this rule? Correct. It would be covered under this rule. If the food is processed or consumed in the United States, it's covered under the rule. The draft rule required 4 hours of training. The latest information that I have, and I've talked to someone from FDA and this is about sanitary transport, sorry. The latest information that I have from FDA is there really might only be, they've revised the draft and they've decided, I guess with feedback from industry, that a 4-hour training would be excessive, and this is the last I've heard, and that was just the beginning of last week. I confirmed that they're only looking at an online 1-hour training. Okay, more. Does this webinar count as training? That's an interesting question. As a trainer, I would say no. I would say it counts as attending a presentation, an informational presentation, but wouldn't really consider this training. Are these considered to be preventive controls? Pest control, food defense according to FSMA HARPC. No, these are not considered to be preventive controls. Under the preventive controls for human food, there are 4 requirements for preventive controls. You must have process preventive controls, allergen, sanitation, and supply chain preventive controls. They would be considered prerequisites or pest control under good manufacturing practices. You spoke about understand that. Is there specifics for the certification bodies that are aiming to have this included in their services? I'm sorry, I don't really understand what that question means. I do know, I think this is in relationship to certification body auditors. I do know that certification body auditors will be approved to conduct foreign supplier verification activities. Here's a question. How do you document personnel that is trained by experience? Would a resume be sufficient? So FDA has not given guidance on how they're going to determine whether or not a person is experienced. So training, that's why attending the training where you're actually going to be getting a training certificate from FSPCA that you've attended the preventive controls for qualified individuals. Training is a good thing to have. And FDA is not giving guidance on how they're going to determine whether a person is experienced. They've said that they will determine that when they conduct an inspection and determine whether or not your facility is in compliance with the regulations. Oh, thank you. Some people are thanking me. That's nice. Will acknowledgments be sent out to validate participation in today's webinar? That's a question for Leslie. I don't really know.
Hi, that's a great question. We will not be, because this is not a training. This is more just like an educational session to better inform you guys about the topic of FSMA training. And also because we have a lot of people that kind of come in and out of the webinar, and then also a lot of people will watch this on YouTube just because like they intended to attend the live event, but they weren't able to because of their work schedules. So for the learning lunches, we do not send out confirmations. We do that, though, for our actual trainings.
So the next question is, there somewhere the standardized curriculum approved by FDA can be viewed? You can go to the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance website, and you can search the website to view the standardized curriculum. Again, it's the Preventive Controls for Human Food curriculum that is being offered by, I'm sure many people on this call are also preventive controls lead trainers, and if you know one of them, they might be able to share the curriculum with you as well. Okay, yeah, the FSPCA website. Okay, products we manufacture shipped FOB, RDOC, customers arrange the transportation, our shipping department loads the trucks, with the sanitary transport training requirement applied to our shipping personnel. Do we need trucker? I think something got cut off there. Yep, it probably did. So the loader, so you manufacture your products, your customers arrange for transportation, you have an agreement with them, they are considered the carrier must be trained. It was my understanding when I spoke with the person from FDA that loaders should also be trained. So if your shipping department is loading the truck, then they also should be trained on how to load the truck to prevent any potential food safety issues. What are the requirements for a manufacturer of food packaging? In relation to what? I'm not really sure what the question is. The training that is required for everyone in food safety, health, and hygiene, can this training be in-house, or does it need to be certain course materials? No, the training for food safety, health, and hygiene, yes, it can be held in-house. It is a training that you can develop yourself. Actually, it could be an online training. There are lots of different venues that are available to you for food safety training. And we offer online training in GMPs. SES does in HACCP. There are many other companies that also offer online training. You can have someone come to your facility and do the training. You can have a person who's already trained actually do the training. So there's no requirement that they have to attend a food safety training class. Other than under the produce rule, a supervisor must attend the standardized curriculum, and under preventive controls for human food, a standardized curriculum is recommended, although as we have just been discussing, it also can be based on your experience. Let's see. Sanitary transport apply to animal feed. Yeah, that's the question. It does not apply to activities performed on the farm, food not consumed in the U.S. Yes, it does. It does. And that was a question that was asked by FDA when I attended a meeting recently on that. So yes, it does. It is covered. Okay, I think I've answered that one already. This is a question for, maybe Leslie can answer this, or maybe, I think Christy's on the call, maybe Christy can answer it. When will SQF start addressing FSMA in Level 2 audits?
That one's definitely going to be a question for Christy and Leanne on the tech team. I'm not sure if she's called in or if she's just streaming through her computer speakers. But Christy, if you're called in and can weigh in on that, awesome. If not, we might have to follow up with that person later.
Yeah. Christy did comment in chat, so I know she is or was on the call. Okay, here's a good question. Does being HACCP certified, implementing SQF systems certified, having a master's degree in food science and nutrition, and having 5 years experience in food manufacturing, quality assurance equivalent to a PCI recognized by the FDA? If I were in charge, I'd say sounds good to me, but since I'm not, as I said earlier, FDA is not giving us guidance on what is considered experience. So it's really, as I said, they will determine, and this is emphasized at all of the Train the Trainers, and I've attended and given one Train the Trainer on preventive controls. The emphasis has always been the determination will be when the FDA inspector comes into the facility and determines that you're in compliance, whether or not the PCQI is qualified through experience. Okay, we purchase and distribute non-seafood items, box in, box out. We're a seafood processing company. Do we need we need a food safety plan and foreign supplier verification. Again, there's not enough information. Do the items require any kind of temperature control? Are you doing, you said box in, box out. If they don't require temperature control, if they're only require, if you're keeping them in an ambient temperature warehouse, then they're not covered. If they do require temperature control, then they are covered. Okay. I don't understand that question. When will the food safety preventive controls for humans, foods, hazards, and control guidance be available? That's a question for FSMA and for the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. I'm sorry, I don't know. I wish I did know the answer to that question. Does the sanitary transport apply to third-party storage warehouse employees as well, or only applicable to in-house shippers and receivers? It's specific to if anyone is loading or carrying. Again, if there's an agreement between the shipper and the carrier that the carrier will be responsible for the safety of the food, then the training is required of the carrier. Okay, Christy just asked that we send the question to her, and she can follow up. Okay, we'll do that, Christy. Thank you. Here's another SQF question. Will SQF be offering an addendum to ensure FSMA requirements are covered during an SQF audit? We'll send that to Christy as well. Okay, if you import products from overseas, would you go through a broker who is subject to the foreign supplier verification? You are subject to foreign supplier verification if you're importing food products from outside of the country, and the verification would be at the processing facility that last touched the product. So basically, you're going to be skipping over the broker. Okay, that looks like all. I believe I've answered most or all of the questions, and we will make sure that Christy does get your questions that are specific to SQF.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Margaret, for taking the time out of your day to give this presentation. We got a lot of great questions and a lot of great feedback from the audience. And thank you again to everyone that took the time out of their day to join us for this session. Like we mentioned in the beginning, we recorded this, and it's going to take me a day or two to just download and edit and upload the video to YouTube. But if you search YouTube for the Safe Quality Food Institute, you guys will see this video posted in a couple days in case you weren't able to stay for all of it, or if you'd like to share this with your coworkers. And Margaret, in case anyone has additional questions for you on training, would you be able to message your email address to the participants if they have something that, I don't know, sometimes you always think of something after, or at least I'm that way.
Sure. I actually should have supplied it to you on a slide. I apologize for not doing that. So if I just type it into chat, Will, can you?
Sure. If you type, if you just make sure. Oh, never mind. Yeah, that'll work for me.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't figure out how to do this. I've typed it into chat, but I guess because I'm the presenter.
No, you should still be able to do that. So there's going to be a send to right above the chat, and you can just click on that and either find all participants, or you can just find my name.
Oh, okay. Okay, wait. All participants. I'm sorry. Yeah, as I said before, I'm a little unfamiliar with this program.